Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. So I've been growing cut flowers for 4 years now, and when I first began I had no real experience growing flowers. In fact, I'm not kidding when I say that I have found that it was as unnaturally green as they come. It's sort of funny for me to reflect back in our early years because I can look back and see with such clarity the mistakes that I made back then. And trust me, there were a lot of them. Now, believe it or not, I'm actually thankful for those early failures because in the process, I learned a lot. But those were definitely some hard-learned lessons that came with plenty of heartache and frustration. And if I can spare you from experiencing at least some of that same frustration, well, in my books, I consider that a win. That's why in today's video, I'm sharing with you 6 of the most common mistakes that I see flower farmers making today. These are the same mistakes that I made early on in my journey, and hopefully after watching this video today, these will be mistakes that you can avoid in your own flower growing journey. So if you're ready, let's get started. Now, I wanted to do this video early on in the season before things really get underway so that you could have a successful season now, even before you get started. And don't worry, in the coming weeks we have lots of plans to share with you how we're planting our flower fields, how we're growing our potted mums, and we'll even take you with us as we seed our pumpkin patch this year. So this is your reminder that if you don't want to miss out on all that good upcoming stuff, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Now I know it's a busy time of the year for flower growers, so let's get right into it. Mistake number 1, thinking everything will go according to plan. I really don't know why I thought things would go so smoothly for me when I first started. Maybe because in theory it all sounded so simple. Plant some seeds, wait for them to grow, and then harvest the flowers as they bloom. My first year, I can remember spending so much time meticulously planning every square inch of my garden. I researched plant spacing and I calculated how many plants I would need to fill every single row. I made sure to know my last frost date. I felt like I had all the pieces of the puzzle. And so when it came to my plan, I didn't deviate too much from it at all. I mean, if I needed 38 plants to fill out a row, I planted exactly 38 seeds, not thinking that some of those seeds wouldn't germinate, that some of those plants wouldn't survive the transplanting process. I didn't even consider that other plants may be taken out by an unexpected late frost, or that insects would munch on my plants before I could even get any sizable blooms from them. And speaking of last frost dates, back in 2019 when I first started, we had an unusually wet spring. I'm talking record-breaking rainfall. And yet I was so convinced that I needed to plant as soon as that last frost date passed. I had it in my mind that I needed to focus more on the calendar regardless of what the weather for that time of the year was actually like. And it's sort of funny to me how someone like myself who works in agriculture, I've been a dairy farmer for nearly 20 years now, you'd think that I'd be more understanding that that's not how Mother Nature works. The biggest lesson I've learned from this all is that you have to be flexible, knowing that there's no such thing as a sure thing, especially when you're working with nature. Nowadays, I plant a good 10 to 20% extra so that I always have more than I need in the event that something doesn't survive the process from seed to garden. I don't use my last frost date as a hard fact. Rather, I look at the weather forecast and know that I'm aiming to see nighttime temperatures that are consistently in the 60s before I plan out my warm, tender annuals. All in all, I'm just more flexible now and willing to adapt depending on what's in front of me, instead of trying so hard to stick to a plan that may not work. If you want to be successful at growing flowers, you have to learn to play your best hand with the cards that you're dealt. Okay, mistake number 2 is skipping steps. In my early years, I often found that I underestimated the amount of work involved with almost everything. And in my hurry to get as many flowers into the ground as possible, there were definitely times that I tried to cut corners by skipping steps that I thought were perhaps, good practices, but not completely necessary. For instance, I wasn't always the best at hardening off my seedlings before transplanting them outside. A lot of times it was survival of the fittest because I just didn't give my baby seedlings enough time to acclimate to the outside weather. They went from being grown inside in a very protected environment to being exposed to elements like bright sun or strong winds that they just weren't used to. And while plenty of flowers did take root, I often think about how much more abundant my garden would have been had I focused less on quantity and a little bit more on quality. And so my encouragement to you is to follow good gardening practices to the best of your ability. When you cut corners, sure, you may save a bit of time or even money up front, but you will pay dearly for it in the end, as your harvests will tend to be smaller and the quality of your flowers will likely suffer. What's more, I've since learned that as I've gained experience and become more proficient at growing flowers, tasks that once took me days to complete, it can easily be accomplished in much less time. So if your fear is that what you're growing isn't enough, know that with practice you'll be able to grow far more than you ever imagined. Now, sort of along those same lines, mistake number 3 is scaling too fast. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of trying something new, but it's a fine line between pushing yourself to accomplish more than you thought possible and just plain overcommitting. I think one of my biggest mistakes I tried to do, especially early on, was trying to do too much too fast. I had this big vision for what I wanted my flower farm to be like, and I had absolutely no patience for how much time it would take to get there. I saw what other more experienced flower farmers were doing, and I really wanted to do it all. I wanted to be able to offer lots of different options to my customers, and I quickly learned that the more that I tried to do, the less that I actually accomplished. The biggest takeaway that I've learned from this all is that there's power in simplifying, and there's no harm in building slowly. As we've expanded here at Two Sisters Flower Farm and added more into our seasonal lineup, I've done my best to scale at a moderate pace. Usually the first year that we try something new, we try it on a much smaller level because it's easier to troubleshoot on a smaller scale than it is on a larger one. I've mentioned before how I'm really excited to be growing tulips next spring in much larger quantities than we've ever grown before. This year, however, I got a small taste of what growing tulips will be like by planting a much smaller quantity of them. I planted only a couple hundred, not a couple thousand. And sure enough, we did run into some problems this year. I've shared on Instagram how some of our buds were much smaller than I would have liked. Now, some of our stems were actually a little bit shorter than I had anticipated. We were able to overcome those problems only because we were experiencing them on a much smaller level than what we would have encountered if we went all in right away. I've learned the hard way that bigger isn't always better. So this next mistake is geared toward my flower friends who are not only growing flowers, but who are also trying to grow a business. And that mistake is waiting until you have product available to start selling. I understand the hesitation to share your story and what you're doing, especially when you're just starting out. But you can't expect that people will show up to buy from you if they don't know who you are. My first year growing flowers, I grew strictly for hobby, and so I didn't share much of what I was doing on social media at all. In year 2, when my goal was to make money, again I waited because I had all these what ifs running through my mind. What if the flowers don't bloom? What if I don't have as much product as I thought that I would? What if the flowers bloom later than I had anticipated? Not to mention, I was so overwhelmed by all of the work that went into growing flowers that adding more onto my plate by trying to grow a social media account, that just seemed impossible. But the problem with waiting is that flowers are a perishable product. And if you can't move them quickly, well, then you're losing out on profit. My first year of selling flowers, my plan was to put like pre-made bouquets onto a flower stand and people could drive by and purchase flowers. Thankfully, the location of my flower stand, it did receive a good amount of traffic, and so I did have some sales, but it also wasn't as profitable as it could have been. Here's the thing, flowers are everywhere, and while you could argue that locally grown farm fresh flowers are unique, there's also a lot of other flower farmers doing the exact same thing as you are. Where I live, there's multiple flower farms, all with flower stands within just a couple miles of one another. And so knowing the farmer that's growing their flowers, well, that can really be a determining factor for people when they're deciding on which flowers that they're going to buy. That's why I think it's so important to take people along on the journey of growing flowers with you. Even if you don't have a final product to share at the moment, share the behind the scenes of what you're doing. Show people the hard work that's going into growing these flowers. Show the process so that by the time that you do have flowers to sell, people have become so invested in what you're doing that they are more than willing to show up and support you by buying whatever you're selling. It takes time to build that know, like, and trust factor. Take time now to build those relationships with potential customers so you're not scrambling to sell once your product is ready. Moving on to mistake number 5, it's chasing novelty. I remember wanting to grow every single type of flower. I would see what other flower farmers were growing, and immediately I wanted to add every variety to my garden because it was new and exciting. And I used to think that summer staples like zinnias and sunflowers were so boring. It seemed like everybody was growing them and I wanted to be just a little bit different. But there's a simple reason that everybody grows them. It's because they're so well loved by customers. Even better, they're easy to grow and they're low maintenance enough that even as a novice gardener, it's possible to make a profit off of them. I think sometimes we like to chase that novelty thinking that it's going to bring in more money. And I think that my biggest mistake was thinking that just because something could have a higher price tag attached to it, it meant that it was going to be more profitable. In my experience, those higher priced flowers usually incur more expenses during the growing process. And unless you have a real specific set of customers, it usually doesn't pay in the long run. So this is your gentle reminder that there is strength in simplicity. What seems boring to you isn't boring to those that you're selling to, because they're not faced with that same repetition that you face every day in the garden while you're growing those summer staples. For them, these type of flowers, they come around just once a year. And because of that, they're more than thrilled to receive a bouquet of those more traditional summer flowers. So before I move on to mistake number 6, I'd like to take a moment to remind you that our garden planning workbook is on sale this month. Right now in this video, I'm walking you through what not to do when it comes to growing cut flowers. But if you'd like more information on what to do, then I encourage you to check out our Two Sisters Flower Farm ebook, where I guide you through the process as you design and plan your cutting garden this year. Inside the workbook, I walk you through all the steps that you need to know in order to enjoy a season's worth of blooms right in your own backyard. Like I said, it's on sale this month for just $10, so link in the description box below if you're interested. Okay, back on topic. Last but not least, mistake number 6 is not pacing yourself. Everyone gets excited at the beginning of the season. For a lot of us that experience long, cold winters, it's a welcome relief when the weather changes and we're finally able to enjoy some time outside. For a lot of us, that excitement can cause us to want to get a fast start out of the gate. We often forget that growing flowers is a marathon, not a sprint. And the only way to make it to the end of the season is to pace yourself along the way. Even here in West Michigan, where we're considered Zone 5B, we have a relatively short season compared to our warmer climate neighbors to the south. But still, in a typical growing season, we enjoy 150 to 170 frost-free days. And in order to not burn out by the end of the growing season, the processes by which you grow those flowers, it has to be sustainable. That's a big reason as to why here at Two Sisters Flower Farm, we practice things like succession planting. Our flower field is about 1/4 of an acre, and while that doesn't sound like a lot, within that small space, we can fit a lot of flowers. And while I'm always tempted to try and plant it all at once so I can focus on other tasks as the season progresses, I've learned that it's better to space out my plantings. That way, not only am I able to space out the workload, I'm also able to space out my bloom time so not everything blooms at once. I realize that succession planting can feel like a complicated topic, but one of the easiest ways that you can experience it in your own gardens is to space out your plantings of sunflowers. Single-stemmed sunflowers are a staple in our summer flower garden. They look beautiful in bouquets as well as on their own. They grow relatively quickly, but because they are single-stemmed, we only get one bloom for every seed that we plant. Meaning that if we want to extend our harvest for all season long, we have to be continuously planting more seeds. Here on our farm, each and every week, I plant a new crop of sunflowers. I decide on a set number of seeds and I choose one day a week, and every week I plant that new batch of sunflowers, so that as one crop of them is being harvested, more of them are growing on, getting closer to blooming. You can certainly succession plant more varieties of flowers, but in my opinion, it's easiest to get a feel for how succession planting works with an easy crop such as sunflowers. Now I will say that if you are experiencing that flower farmer burnout from not pacing yourself, you're not alone. It's very common, and that's actually why I created this video right here. In it, I share my 8 tips for making it through your flower season without feeling overwhelmed. I encourage you to check it out after this video, and I'll link it in the description box below. Well, there you have it, 6 flower farming lessons that I hope you don't have to learn the hard way. It's my hope that this video encourages you to press on and to keep going despite the hardships that you may experience. I truly hope that the joy of growing beautiful flowers, that it outweighs the frustrations that you may experience getting there. Now, if you'd like more tips on how to set yourself up for success early on in your flower farming journey, I do have another video where I share 9 tips on what I do differently if I were just starting to grow flowers this year. I'll link that video in the description box below as well. One last thing before you go, if you found the information in this video helpful, could you do me a favor and please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button below. We'd really appreciate it. I just want to say thank you again for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye guys.